When you were a child, when was the first time you really thought about death? Was it at a relative's funeral? When Bubbles was sent down the toilet? Or maybe when Obi-Wan became Obi-Gon? In my case, it was the first episode of Yu Yu Hakusho and this horrifying cutscene from a Japanese PlayStation game. We're talking about that game today. Go Beyond My Dead Body, known in Japan as Ore no Shikabane o Koete Yuke, or just OreShika, is a 1999 PlayStation 1 game that resembles other JRPGs of its time. Turn-based combat with 2D sprites, dungeons full of monsters, anime-style artwork, and a narrative told through character dialogue and occasional cutscenes. It's got it all. I only know about this game because I watched my mom play it when I was 5 years old. And these memories never left. It's not just that cutscene that burned OreShika into my brain though. The haunting theme song, the wailing cries of babies echoing during mysterious rituals, and this freaky kid in the cover art staring directly into my soul. Ugh. This game creeped me out, but I couldn't look away. Skip to 2011. A remake of this game comes out for the PSP, and I finally have a chance to play it myself. And this game slaps. OreShika is a fantastically cohesive game experience. Everything from its artwork, story, narrative structure, and gameplay complement each other so perfectly to immerse the player in an eerie, antique world. These elements come together to provide not just a fun gameplay loop, but an emotionally resonant journey that convinces the player that they are the protagonist of their own story. And after 15 years of waiting, OreShika 2, known as OreShika Tainted Bloodlines in English, comes out for the PS Vita, and is met with great disappointment from its core fanbase, along with numerous hit pieces against the game. What happened? Let me take you through a tale of death and birth, family and revenge, gods and humans, along with a story about how one man's hubris and love for his OC failed to revive this legendary title. The original OreShika isn't talked about much outside of Japan since it's never been localized, but within Japan, it's a classic beloved title with a passionate fanbase. It sits at a respectable 89th place in Japan's Ranking.net's Best RPG list, which isn't all that bad considering all the Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Pokemon titles it's competing against. Who let Persona 5 in here twice? When it initially came out, many reviewers said that the game was unforgettable. You can look at their quotes right on the back of the PS1 copy. Editor of Famitsu PS, Hidetoshi Matsumoto says,
記載増田商事と職人集団アルファシステムが作り上げたオレシカ、子持ちと妊婦に大受けとの噂のオレシカ、私にも受けました。
Tomoaki Sugimura from PlayStation Magazine says,
このゲームの最大の特徴はプレイを重ねるほどに自分が持つ血に対する慈しみや誇りが生まれること。普段日常で自分自身の血についてどれほどのことを考えるだろうか。
Dramatic, I know. Even the catchphrase of this game is live, die, and trust. It's a game that confronts the cycle of death and birth in an intimate way. And that's a pretty ambitious theme for a video game, isn't it? There's something in OreShika that speaks to the soul. And to understand this, I want to guide you through both the game and narrative progression. So, let's embark on this journey from the top, the title screen. But before that, remember to smash that subscribe button and also check out my Patreon. That's where I post retrospectives on my videos and work-in-progress updates. When you boot up the game for the first time, do not immediately make a new save file. Before starting the game, you need to play the prologue cutscene and watch your parents die. The story takes place in Heian period Japan, and a powerful and evil ogre, Shuten Doji, is terrorizing Kyoto. The Emperor of Japan sent many warriors to Mount Oe to defeat the demon lord, but humans are no match for him. But your parents, Genta and Odin, made it to the monstrous king's home base. The couple barges into the temple for the final fight, but your father, tricked by a fallen maiden, is stabbed in the back and killed. Men, typical. When Shuten Doji shows his inflated form, he makes Odin submit to him by threatening the life of her child. You, her baby. Odin is taken away, and baby player's life is spared, but Shuten Doji places 2 curses on the child and their bloodline. The curse of shortened life that destines the family to live lives lasting only 2 years, and the curse of extinction that prevents them from creating life with other mortals. This cutscene pulls players right into the world of OreShika. Instead of throwing the player into a tutorial and walking them through the combat controls step by step, you watch your parents battle a boss in the same way you eventually will. When it comes time for you to climb Mount Oe, you'll fight this monkey guard too. Almost immediately, OreShika plants the seeds of its main theme of generational progress. It is about following the same paths as your ancestors in hopes that you push just a couple steps further before passing on the torch to your children. The animated portion of this cutscene emphasizes the tragic nature of the game too. We'll go in depth about the plot later, but it's about the preciousness and fragility of life, and antithetical to that, how cruel and malicious fate can be. The way your mother Odin desperately begs Shuten Doji to spare her child's life is so sad and awful, especially contrasted to the demon's glee. Now that you have the prologue out of the way, you can create a new save file. Another interesting thing about OreShika's presentation is how it's not afraid to break the 4th wall at times. This is the first thing you're told when you select New Game. During this onboarding process, this peppy voice clearly acknowledges the player. It stresses you to input your real name so the ending of the story is more emotional. It asks you, white-collared worker, how much time do you want to invest in this game? When you enter the household menu for the first time, you're told, hey, explore the menu screen before demon hunting. But don't worry if all these words and numbers don't make sense. Just focus on not dying first. I also bought the PS1 copy of this game for the manual, and oh boy, is she thick. It's about 130 pages long and written not so much as a manual, but like a friend explaining a board game to you. Only that friend also made the game. In the section that briefly mentions the vigor and devotion metrics of playable characters, and again, don't worry if these words don't make sense to you right now, it reads, if you want to learn more about these numbers, read the explanation provided in the guide menu in the game. If you can't be bothered to read that, you can learn from your own mistakes. This is really charming and inviting. OreShika's game and story immerse the player as a main character, so this direct communication brings players into its world quicker than monotone instruction or ham-fisted attempts at world building shoehorned into expository dialogue. Anyway, once you're done inputting your name, birthday, social security number, and game difficulty, you'll create your first family member. As mentioned earlier, you and all your heirs are cursed with an accelerated lifespan and can't have children with humans. This baby is supposed to die a sad and lonely death in 2 years. Luckily, the head goddess of the heavens has ordered the deities to help you on your quest for salvation. The gods will partner with you to create your heirs, but not for free. Now, with the power of God and anime on your side, your bloodline can gradually become stronger with every generation, and you'll eventually defeat Shuten Doji, lift your curses, and become the savior of Kyoto. So go on, orphan adult of 8 months. Choose your first baby daddy. Like, right now. Hey, look at that, you got a baby boy. Now, this is your first child. You better choose his name carefully. That works. Finally, you're sent off to your home and are ready to start your generational journey to break your family's curse. From this household menu, you can look at your family's stats, go to shops, and save the game, as well as decide on how to spend this month, either by going on expeditions to fight demons, commencing the union ritual to create a child, or resting to recover your family's health. I can tell you right now that you won't be resting much at all. The manual literally says that this is one of the worst choices you can make in the game. This is when you're introduced to your helper, Itsuka. She's a classic ditzy girl who adds a lot of light to this otherwise bleak game. She'll help you with things like choosing the best equipment for your team, managing your stocks, giving you updates on your town and monthly events, and most importantly, holding the ritual between your family and the deities to welcome new life into the world. She gets all dressed up in a ceremonial robe when you want to make a baby. This world, with all its monsters and your cursed fate, feels absolutely hostile towards your family. So it's reassuring to always have someone so cheery by your side. Still, my favorite character has to be Kitsuto, the mysterious boy who guides you through the demon-filled lands of Japan. The first few times you enter a stage, he tells you a bit about himself, the game's system, or the story behind the bosses of these stages. He's voiced by Minami Takayama, probably best known for voicing Conan from Detective Conan. But Kitsuto is my favorite role of hers ever. Just listen to this voice acting.
火と風の使い方を勝手な判断で地上に伝えた罪で、二人の神はこの九十楼に閉じ込められた。でも寒さや飢えに苦しむ声の代わりに、人の笑い声がこの塔の中にも聞こえてきたんだ。でもね、後悔しなかったのは、火と風を使って人が殺し合いを始めるまでのたったの1年だけだったのさ。
After a few meetings, you'll realize that he's a person with many layers. He first introduces himself meekly, saying he wants to help you and your family defeat the Shuten Doji, despite his powerlessness. He tries to keep a smile on, although he looks very sad when he explains that Shuten Doji cursed him too and took away his physical form. But underneath that melancholy is a dark cynicism. He speaks with a theatrical, almost playful tone when talking about the tragedies of the gods, such as the goddess who was captured by humans and put on display in a freak show, or the foolish wind and thunder gods who were punished for teaching humans how to use fire. Cool story, but we gotta get to the meat of this game, the expeditions. We'll break this up into exploration and combat. When you enter a stage, you control the leader of your team and walk across lands with demons wandering around. Encounter them and you enter combat. Typical RPG stuff. Both your squad and your enemies can place members in the front or back lines of battle, and different classes have different attack ranges, damage capabilities, etc. With 8 different classes to choose from, there's a lot of depth to party formation. Here's a quick look at some of your options. Swordsmen are the most balanced, but can only target single characters with their normal attack, while spears can stab through both front and back rows. Both archers and gunmen can target anywhere on the field, but archers deal less damage, while gunmen have lower accuracy. My personal favorite are the monks that can do flying kicks into the back row, but can also land multiple hits on frontline enemies if you're lucky. If you wanna, you can have your whole family just be smashers. OreShika has unique quirks that spice up combat, of course. First is the item roulette. Every time you encounter an enemy, a roulette will spin at the beginning of battle to determine what you'll earn by defeating the leader of the encounter. This could be money, scrolls, weapons, consumable items, or experience points. Combat in OreShika tends to be on the hack and slash side, and you're encouraged to wrap up battles as quickly as you can. It's got a nice snappiness to it that's reminiscent of active time battles. Think early Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger. As someone who doesn't like slow grinding, this is a big plus. The quickest way to win is to target the leader of the enemy squad. Once he's down, the battle ends and you collect all the items in the roulette. Although, the more enemies you defeat, the more experience points you get. And you also get bonus experience from wiping out the whole enemy squad. But the more time you take in battle, the more exploration time you waste. And there's always a chance that the enemy leader flees with all the items before you get to strike him down. There's a lot to consider here. By letting you know what items are rewarded at the start of battle, OreShika asks players what to prioritize: time, rewards, or stamina. This ties into quirk number 2, spells. In OreShika, new spells are not gained through leveling up, but through collecting scrolls. Spells like healing, elemental attacks, support buffs, and offensive debuffs are all things you must collect by exploring. And once you find a scroll, you don't immediately learn its spell. Your team has to bring that item back home after an expedition and pass it around for the whole family to learn. Even then, you might have to wait till little Jimmy is old enough to learn a spell. He'll learn how to throw rocks pretty early, but it's going to take some leveling up to learn how to cause earthquakes. However, this system makes it so that all your family members can learn the same spells, letting your characters cast offensive spells together with multiplied damage. You know, bring all your spirit energy together, Kamehameha style. What's especially smart game design is how a lot of the stat effect spells also double as exploration spells. For example, the spell that increases attack turn speed in combat also lets you travel across the stage faster during exploration. The skill that puts enemies to sleep in battle also makes the demons walking around the stage stop. The spell that lets characters mirror another team member's elemental traits in combat can also be used outside of combat to momentarily display the stage map. It's kinda like the environmental skills in Pokemon games. Surf for seas, cut for trees, that kind of stuff. Just adding this extra use to spells makes them feel more real because they have practical uses outside of battle. Lastly, and this is very important to strategizing, is your time limit. There's no deadline to your mission to kill Shuten Doji. Well, okay, the game will pretend that you beat the game and force the ending cutscene on you when you have 256 family members, because at that point, even the game is like, that's too many babies. But otherwise, you're not in a rush. However, your family operates on a 12-month calendar with seasonal events and stages. So it's important to know what month you're in and what you want to do in the coming months. And don't forget, your family members only have 2 years to live. If you decide to go demon hunting, your family starts their expedition at the beginning of the month. And when you enter a stage, this clock appears in the top left corner. Once the fires of this clock all burn out, a month has passed, and you can choose to either return home or continue your journey into the next month. The further you progress in a stage, the harder this choice becomes. Because if you leave the stage to go home, you'll have to start the stage right from the top next time. It really sucks to see the last fire burn out just as you're about to encounter a boss battle. Yet, if you choose to continue your expedition into the following month, you miss out on a chance to perform a mating ritual or any other non-demon hunting plans, all on top of your team members losing vigor. In this game, there are 3 types of points that you have to keep an eye on for your characters: health, magic, and vigor. The first 2 are the typical RPG stuff, but vigor relates to the probability of your characters surviving past the current month. If this number is at a full 100 and your character is young, they're basically guaranteed to live to see another day. But if your character's vigor is low and they're close to 2 years old, I'd be a bit worried. Vigor can lower based on a few things. Most obvious is when a character's health hits 0 in battle and they're defeated. their vigor will also hit 0, making the chances of them dying immediately after arriving home quite high. Using secret techniques can chip away at vigor, forcing them to walk around with low HP or transitioning into the new month with low HP while also lower vigor. Basically, there are consequences to pushing your party when they're already tired. And naturally, the older one gets, the harder it is to maintain vigor. By the time a character is 1 year and 6 months old, the lowering of vigor points will become inevitable. Even if you leave your elderly members at home, unless you keep pumping expensive drugs into Grandpa, his metrics are going to drop at increasing rates every month until he finally passes. But hopefully by this point, the character has a child and they've trained their child to pass down any secret techniques. Sarah's memories and archery techniques will be remembered through her daughter, Zera. Over the course of tens, possibly hundreds of in-game years, you and your heirs venture out into monster-infested lands and battle cursed deities to become stronger. This is done not just by leveling up individual characters, but also through collecting spells and class scrolls to diversify your team's strategies, defeating monsters to earn experience points and divinity points, and then using those divinity points to mate with gods and goddesses to create stronger children. The key to playing OreShika is to manage your time and resources so you're effectively cycling through your characters, adding new members as older ones pass, and gradually becoming stronger as you chip away at enemies and world progression. It's just like Derby Stallion, but with humans. OreShika is very unique in its themes, but it wouldn't be fair to call its game mechanics novel in the grand scope of gaming history. The Fire Emblem series began 9 years prior to OreShika, so gamers were already familiar with character permadeath by the time it came out. The aforementioned Derby Stallion established gameplay based on raising characters across generations, and that came out in 1991. And after OreShika, many games have implemented similar mechanics, like Conception, an RPG/dating sim where the main character creates star children with 12 goddesses. I've never wanted to kill a mascot character more than this thrusting raccoon. And Zanki Zero Last Beginning has characters who go through the cycle of death and rebirth while their age affects the RPG gameplay. It's worth noting that both Conception and Zanki Zero are way more clear about sending children into battle than OreShika is. Yet, despite its standard RPG gameplay, OreShika's premise stands out because what it tries to simulate is not just a grand, century-spanning heroic narrative, but the feeling of having grandchildren. In interviews, OreShika's game designer Shoji Masuda says that the birth of his second son inspired him to make the game. He states that in the moment he held his son, he thought about his inescapable death, that all life that comes into the world will eventually leave and be replaced. It was both a touching and existential experience for him. In addition, he thought about how happy his parents were about the birth of their grandson. He recognized that having a grandchild felt different from having an immediate child. That one feels a great sense of family history and satisfaction from seeing their lineage continue. And if you, like Masuda, view video games as a tool to simulate experiences, why limit yourself to the fantasy of magical adventures, dating quirky characters, or racing fast cars? Why not try to simulate more intimate human phenomena, like the experience of seeing your descendants live and grow? Even the commercials of this game are based on this concept.
じいさん最後に言っただろう。俺の屍を越えてゆけ。あれ分かる気がしてな。
生きる死ぬ託す RPG 俺の屍を越えてゆけ。
そのうちお前にも分かるさ。
I played a bit of Conception for comparison's sake, and tonally, that game and OreShika are polar opposites. Conception is an unserious pastime drowning in the horny aesthetics of bishoujo games that ultimately use its classmating mechanic as an ironically chaste setup for its harem plot. You would never consider the children made between the main character and the 12 star maidens as their own people. Taken favorably, they're a representation of your bond with their mother, which is the focus of the game. But your children function as soldiers you'll replace as soon as stronger characters are born. Why would I bother giving my kids unique names when Archie is indistinguishable from all the other magician class kids in my army of 12 child soldiers? Compared to conception, the theme of childbearing in OreShika is desexualized and momentous. It may be largely due to the fact that one of the parents is literally a deity, but the union ritual is sacred, and thus the creation of a child feels sacred. And the significance of that life and its eventual loss is felt throughout the game. Allow me to illustrate this through the life of one of my characters. Orange was born between this handsome foxboy god and my archer, Apple. When the helper Itsuka brought her home from the heavens, she said that Orange's ears takes after her father's. I'm not sure about that. I assign Orange the same class as her mother. This way her bloodline's secret archery techniques can be passed down. Apple learned the Pear sniper shot from her father, Pear, and discovered the Apple Firestorm herself. It would be such a shame if we lost their achievements. For the first 2 months of her life, Orange is too young to go out into battle and is forced to stay home. I could have her train by herself, but there's only so much that can be self-taught. I instead assign another family member to mentor her to better improve her stats. For the first month, I have Leek, an elder on the brink of death, train her. As expected, her stats increase quite a bit, and Leek passes away the next month. In the second month, I assign her mother Apple to train her so she can learn those secret techniques. At 2 months old, Orange is ready to join expeditions. She's still pretty young and low on defense points, so I put her in the back lines of combat so enemies don't target her that often. Her expedition team also includes older characters with higher attack and defense stats. In one battle, the leader of the team, Nil Nilgiree, shields her from an attack that would have otherwise killed her. For her first few expeditions, I decide to play it safe. I battle weaker enemies to level her up instead of going after a boss, focusing on collecting spell scrolls and finding cursed deities. Sometimes when you enter combat, the roulette will list an item called a cursed collar. If this item is included in the roulette, it means that one of the enemies is a god that was cursed into a demon, and if you successfully collect this item, that deity will be released from their demon form and they'll be added to your roster of potential mating partners. During one of the expeditions, Orange releases Dororo Shingen, this catfish god. When Orange is 8 months old, she's mature enough to perform the union ritual and have her own child. But we're in summer right now, and that's when the time-sensitive skeleton tower appears. Since this stage is only available June through August, I put off Orange's union ritual to spend 2 months at the skeleton tower. During this time, not only does Orange discover a new archery technique, my team defeats the boss. My hammer-wielding smasher Banana uses up most of his vigor though, so when my expedition squad returns home, he immediately collapses and dies. Cue funeral scene. Skip a few months into the future and Orange is about a year and a month old. I think it's about time she makes a baby. I choose the catfish god to unite with her, it only feels appropriate since she rescued him, and she gets a cute baby boy. At this point, Orange is a really powerful and reliable character who's learned tons of spells. She's a cornerstone to my party. But because I favored Orange, I've had to neglect my lancer, Melon. I haven't taken her on many expeditions, nor have I been giving her gifts to bribe her for her devotion to the family. So one day, Itsuka comes running up to me saying Melon has run away from home, abandoned the family, and took a few items with her. I've lost her. She's gone forever. Whatever, I still have Orange. Her son Lemon is delivered from the heavens and formally joins the family. And I could assign Orange to train him now, but that would mean she can't go on an expedition this month. You know what? I'll have her join the expedition this month and she can train her son when we come back. I think we're just strong enough to take on the wind and thunder gods. Wait, she didn't train her son. She can't die now. She didn't pass down her archery techniques. Goddamn. That was the life of one character. But you can see how she had a role in the family that changed as she grew. You saw how older characters protect younger ones as they grow stronger, how elder members who are too old to battle are still useful mentors, and how favoring one character over another can mean losing a family member. And because I wasn't careful with how I fought during my expedition, I lost not just a valuable character, but the collection of special moves passed down through generations. Orange's son Lemon must now rediscover these techniques by himself, and that only happens by chance when he levels up. It could be his son or even his grandson who finally rediscovers the Apple Firestorm technique. Each new family member is their own person with their own experiences, and those experiences all accumulate with a death scene. When a family member's time comes, you're forced to sit through a scrolling obituary of their accomplishments. Yeah, you have to watch this cutscene. You can't skip out on funerals in real life, so what makes you think you can skip out on your great-great-great-grandson's funeral? A sad instrumental version of the game's theme song plays as a portrait of your character sits in the middle of the screen. As the obituary finishes scrolling, the music fades, and you hear their final words.
さあ、そろそろ仕事に出かけようぜ。
Sometimes it's an uplifting message to the family left behind, or a statement that lets them die with dignity.
血を吐いて汗も唾も出なくなって本当の勝負はそっからよ。
Other times, they express regret for not being strong enough. It's always heart-wrenching when a stern-looking character passes while you're crying that they don't want to die yet.
試してみたい作戦も覚えたい術もいっぱいあります。だから俺まだ死ねません。
This is the first and last time you hear this family member speak. But there's a strong humanizing effect where you feel like you're seeing the side of someone you couldn't see until their final moments. Although sometimes this can feel quite jarring, the character's portrait and the personality you imagine for them won't always match their final words. I will admit that the funeral scenes are a bit of a slog after a few repetitions, but this is one of the many ways OreShika forces the player to interact with the game on its own terms. Another example of this is the fact that there's only one save slot. OreShika's game design is anti-save scum. It really wants you to stick with whatever choices you make and deal with whatever losses you're stuck with. Sometimes that means you lose 4 family members in one go. Sucks to be me. Even the save function encourages players to save only once every gaming session, giving you the option to end the sitting while listening to the theme song. When you choose this, the song plays, and the only way you can get out of this screen is to exit the game, or back in the PS1 days, turn off the console. It's the game telling you your choices are finalized. See you again another day. These mechanics makes OreShika's characters feel alive and valuable. There's also little visual cues that give the impression of life behind the screen. When you look at your character's stats, these bars bounce up and down rhythmically, like a heartbeat. What do these bars mean? Like all this. You can take family photos to keep track of who's in your household at different points of history. Somehow I forgot to mention this until now, but when the character with the player name passes, you get to assign who inherits that name and become the head of the household. And when they pass, you choose another character to inherit that name. It's a little detail, but this keeps the player's identity present in the game without completely overriding the individuality of playable characters. So in this playthrough, I, Nil, looked like this, and Nil the 14th looked like this. Every time I think about it, the logic of this game impresses me. The way characters are born, the way they age and develop, and how they die reflect the themes of generational progress and successfully make characters feel ephemeral. The family planning and expedition mechanics are punishing when they catch me being thoughtless or reckless, but very rewarding when I plan my explorations carefully or intentionally take risks. It's hard for me to point at something in this game that doesn't feel justified. Even things like town donations and stock trading make sense. Your family is a noble warrior clan, not peasants. It makes sense that you invest money into the village to unlock better shop items or helpful features like stronger drugs for grandpa. It adds to the feeling that your family must be the ones to save Kyoto. We will come back to this later. Yet, even more than the mechanics of this game and its theme, OreShika's visuals are the most striking. From the gameplay you've seen so far, two types of art styles should have popped out to you. The brush painting style sprites of the enemies in combat, and the 90s era anime art style for playable characters and deities. At first glance, it's easy to assume that these two styles clash, but I argue they blend perfectly. This game is set in the Heian period of Japan, which lasted from around the 9th to 12th century. Although most of the population at this time performed grueling physical labor, slept in dirt houses, and constantly faced food scarcity, it's a time known for its aristocracy's lifestyle, full of leisure and artistic and literary achievements. It was an era when Japan's own cultural and aesthetic identity started to form in the upper class, but the Chinese influences from the prior Nara period remained. Chinese Buddhism and Japanese Shinto kami worship blended, and ceremonies were constantly performed. So it makes sense that this game's UI is dark and muted with accents of lavish gold ornaments. The menu windows are simple, but maintain the visual through line with its earthy reds and deep blues and grays. The union ritual scenes specifically are dim in a way that makes me feel like I'm entering a part of a temple that's sacred and forbidden. And this might be a very particular appeal, but the abundance of kanji characters adds to this historical setting too. Writing was a significant part of aristocratic life in the Heian period, especially for women. Their diaries and books, written with elegant brushstrokes, are as much of a visual representation of the Heian period as it is a record of its culture. Speaking of brushstrokes, when it comes to the background art, I favor the PS1 stylization over the PSP remake. The PS1 environment art is not as defined and certainly not as colorful as the PSP's, but that style communicates the time period so well. Ink paintings use contrasting density to convey depth, with fine, clear strokes for objects in the foreground and blurred shapes for background elements. The PS1 combat screen backgrounds feature monotone colors and simulate the blurred mountains and trees with their pixel art. This artistic choice must have resulted from technical limitations of the console, but it's also an homage to Chinese-inspired Heian art. The way the art style matches the artistic techniques of its time period to present the setting of the story is really cool. That isn't to say that the PSP environments are bad. They also keep that rustic feel with a papery grain and brush texture. Although it's more colorful, the coloring is intentionally a bit dark and muddy to make the more vibrant character sprites stand out. If I were to make a comparison, the PS1 backgrounds are like Heian scroll paintings, while the PSP backgrounds are like vibrant ukiyo-e prints of the Edo era. But both PS1 and PSP versions maintain the flatness that old Japanese art is known for, and that artistic choice fits amazingly well in the medium of 2D RPGs. Think of pieces like the Chochu Giga, a series of paintings featuring anthropomorphic animals wrestling and chasing each other, and the illustrations of the Tale of Genji, a story of love in the aristocracy that exemplifies the Heian period. These kinds of illustrations tell stories and are read from right to left, much like the typical 2D video game combat screen. The monster art feels like it was directly pulled out of woodblock prints, and it fits seamlessly into this environment. Some of these creatures are very clear references to famous artwork, like how the skeleton tower with its giant skull bosses strongly resembles Gesha Dokuro, this guy on my playmat, and the lava pit in hell stages reference paintings of Buddhist hell. Although these sprites are barely animated, their lanky dance-like poses or domineering scale breathe plenty of life into the screen. The language of 2D RPGs and Japanese art feels like a match made in heaven. When so much of this game's art direction is based on ancient Japanese art, it's easy to argue that a contemporary anime art style would have detracted from immersing the player in the ancient world of Heian Japan. But OreShika's artwork is no longer contemporary anime art, is it? Since it came out in the tail end of the 20th century, OreShika's anime art feels stylized like bishoujo titles of its time, stuff along the lines of Tenchi Muyo, but with the grittiness of something like a 90s Rumiko Takahashi fantasy title like Mermaid Forest. There's this unpolished, dark underbelly to its artwork, and that fits with the theme of fighting weird demons and the political drama between humans and deities. If you're dealing with fantasy battles with gods, raw sexuality, and disgusting body horror, I'd say the classic OVA anime style is the way to go. You want something that feels slimy, dark, and a little bit silly. Let's talk mating. It's time to introduce all the dashing gods and goddesses of the heavens. We have a wide variety of potential partners to help strengthen your family. Which handsome man would you like to father your child? Fairy nerd, smoking hot, kinda furry, totally a furry, a literal monkey, a literal fish? Are you looking for hot goddesses in your area? We got cat girls, fox milfs, clam girls and crab girls, goth GFs and Buddhist monks. This girl is straight up Nadia, and this one that's a reference to the idol group AKB48 is kinda messed up. Do you like your partner to look like a mascot character? 'Cause here you go. We even have mystery gender twins that you can breed with either a male or female heir. To get real with you, these folks have a high chance of birthing twins but could give your children terrible base stats. Union at your own risk. These deity designs are one of the highlights of this game. There are only a handful that get much development in the story of OreShika, but they don't need a role in the narrative to stand out. I picked the funnier ones, of course, but this roster of colorful men and women, all with unique quirks, makes the heavens feel full of life. Some of the gods are based on real religious icons, like Ebisu, the god of luck and fishing, although this version is more of a reference to the Ebisu beer, and the wind and thunder gods, Fujin and Daijin. Some of them are based on motifs often related to spirituality, like the lotus flower or New Year's mochi cakes. A lot of them have names based on wordplay. Kubitsuri Okon is one of my favorites. Her name is written Kubitsuri Okon, with the kanji symbols meaning 9 tails and the sound foxes make in Japanese, kon kon. It hints at her nature as a 9-tailed fox spirit. Her lore, though, is that when she was a human, her husband left her for another woman, and she kubi o tsutta, hanged herself. Here's another one. The name Kyokokuten Arisu includes the kanji characters for Mirrorland. She's an Alice in Wonderland reference. Each one of these deities is so fleshed out, despite how we usually only see their name and portrait. The other anime thing about these gods is how they all have fully voiced one-liners, another small but effective glance at their personalities. Some of them can get suggestive, but they're mostly just cheeky fun, like you're not actually making babies the old-fashioned way. Itsuka shakes her bells around and the human's energy and the deity's energy mix together and whatnot. Nothing weird is being insinuated. At least I think so. However you decide to interpret that, it's not that gratuitous. Like Itsuka, these silly phrases add humor to this otherwise grim game. What could be potentially problematic, though, is that this game doesn't discourage incest. As long as you have the divinity points required for the deity, your character is over 8 months old, and the heterosexual mating conditions are met, there is nothing stopping you from making your entire family union with the same god and goddess. Dad, son, and grandpa can all make babies with the same catgirl. We're taking sister wives to a whole new level. To make matters worse, the game rewards you for conceiving children with the same deity multiple times by ascending them in the heavenly hierarchy, increasing their stats, and making them an even better choice as a parent. But that's not all. Around the midpoint of the game, a deifying event could trigger upon the death of a playable character. If you allow this, Itsuka will send your deceased relative's soul into the heavens, adding mom or dad to your roster of potential mates. This game operates on the Habsburgian theory of genetics. This game design is unhinged, and I like it. It's messed up in a way that's consistent with the rest of the game. Like, come on, if you can stomach incest between Greek gods, you can handle this. Zeus alone has a horrific family tree. And this is another example of how the edginess of 90s anime matches the eerie parts of Japanese folklore and messy Heian period romance. 80s and 90s anime OVAs weren't always messed up, but they have that kind of reputation because they weren't afraid to depict body horror, overt sexuality, etc. These transgressive aesthetics are in the DNA of this style of Japanimation.
I'm never gonna have a real girlfriend. I'm gonna be by myself forever.
Similarly, folklore and ancient tales are not going to match the social and political sensibilities of modern times. The tale of Genji is all about taboo love affairs. The main character, Genji, falls in love with his stepmother and then personally raises his younger cousin into the perfect woman. The tale of Genji is also about how life is fleeting. The aristocrats of the Heian period only lived to be about 30 or 40 years old. Although exaggerated, the shortened lifespan of the characters in OreShika match the time period in this way too. Let me clarify though that this game does not encourage inbreeding as much as I let on. Naturally, the more powerful your clan gets, the easier it becomes to collect divinity points, and you're going to experiment with different, higher-ranked deities. You are free to choose whichever god you can afford from this list of nearly 100 deities, the same way I am free to choose the Foxboy for the 6th time. However, when you first play OreShika, you'll see that almost half of the roster of deities is missing. They need your help to be found. Makes you wonder what happened to them, huh? And why did the heavens agree to help your family in the first place? You might be cursed, but they could have just let you die. You're just a human after all, right? Before we discuss the plot of OreShika, I highly recommend that you experience it yourself by playing the game. This story is revealed bit by bit. A lot of it is told in third person by Kitsuto, like it's folklore. Details are revealed from talking to the boss deities that you have to defeat several times before their spirits are freed from Earth. The story is paced at the same rate as the growth of your family, and so I'm sort of defeating the point by explaining it all in one go. If you don't want this experience spoiled for you, now's your time to duck. But also, good luck finding a way to play this game. PS1 and PSP OreShika have not received an official localization, and as far as I know, fan translation projects have gotten nowhere. Even if you have an intermediate level of Japanese, it's hard to evaluate how easily you can play this game. The gameplay is repetitive, but with all the Chinese characters and multiple stats to keep track of, it's hard for a non-Japanese reader to engage with the mechanics on a deeper level. Maybe the best way for an English speaker to enjoy this game is through me! I'll be on Twitch playing PSP OreShika after I put this video out, so come over and chill with me. It'll take me a while to beat the game though, so feel free to continue this video for a plot summary. Spoilers ahead. Let's start at the point of the game where several years have passed since you, the first child, has died and you're a few generations into your bloodline. You decide that this month you will raid Mount Oe and defeat Shuten Doji. It's a bit of a struggle, but your family is strong enough to strike him down. Take that! As the ogre falls, numerous deities are released from his body and return to heaven. Great! Now your curse will be lifted, no more monsters will rampage Kyoto, and Kitsuto will get his physical form back, right? Well, the last thing happens. Kitsuto appears in his familiar form, but solid, from the body of the red demon you thought was Shuten Doji. Turns out that Kitsuto was the demon lord Shuten Doji all along. Who could have seen that coming? It was true that he was cursed, just that it was a seal that the heavens put on him. So at this point, the game gives you extra stages to explore, and you have new bosses to defeat at each stage until you can finally reach Kitsuto, who's been revealed to be the real final boss. But why was Kitsuto sealed in that form in the first place? This story started long before you were born. It all began when one goddess fell in love with a human man and gave birth to 2 children on Earth. The heavens discovered that these demigods have the potential to become stronger than pure-blooded gods. The gods began calling these kinds of demigod children Shuten Doji. The birth of these children splits the heavens politically into 2 groups. The conservative gods don't want to be involved with humans at all. They believe these children are threats to the balance between gods and humans and want them dead. The revolutionary gods want to use these half-human, half-god children as a way to exert direct power over humans. After much debate, the head goddess Yuko takes the side of the revolutionaries and decides to make the 2 Shuten Doji children the new rulers of the humans. She sends a divine message down to Earth, telling the humans to worship the Shuten Doji children as kings. The humans then build a temple and a village of worship on Mount Oe. In response, the conservative gods send a message to the Emperor of Japan to crush the Shuten Doji kings while they're young. One day, the Emperor sends his soldiers to Mount Oe. The female child Shuten Doji dies, and their goddess mother, Ogyo, is captured by humans. The male child escapes the chaos thanks to his followers, but since his home is in shambles, he's dropped off at the Tori Senbangyu gates. After this uprising, the head goddess Yuko takes the spirit of the fallen Shuten Doji girl into her own hands. She recognizes the power this demigod has and passes the throne to her, giving her the title Hiruko. The physical remains of Hiruko eventually become a certain someone. As the new head of the heavens, Hiruko banishes the conservative gods from heaven and turns them into demons. Remember how I explained that some demons in combat are actually cursed gods? Those are the gods that Hiruko punished. Meanwhile, the surviving Shuten Doji boy, Kitsuto, is found by a woman at the Tori Senbangyu gates. She'd been praying for a child and happily takes Kitsuto in as her own son. As thanks for nurturing him, Kitsuto uses his powers to give great luck and fortunes to his adoptive mother. But when her jealous husband takes it all away from her and leaves her for another lady, the woman hangs herself. Sound familiar? Now with no mother, Kitsuto wanders into the icy caves and is found by the Prince of Ice, another deity banished from heaven. The prince takes him in, but since he's a man, he's unable to feed the baby Kitsuto milk. Naturally, he raises him on blood instead. Does this make Kitsuto a blood boy? Growing up on Iceman blood, Kitsuto becomes extremely powerful. When mature, Kitsuto starts his revenge on the gods and humans who tried to kill him by taking back control of Mount Oe, reclaiming his throne as a king among humans. But the gods in heaven can't just sit there and watch Kitsuto burn Kyoto down. After much struggle, they seal Kitsuto away in a demon's body. although a number of gods end up caught up in the seal with him. That's why when you defeat Shutendoji the first time, a bunch of deities are released. But Kitsuto isn't completely sealed away. He's able to walk around in a ghostly form, and the head goddess Hiruko, his sister, can't just leave those trapped deities inside Mount Oe either. That's when she comes up with a plan. Fight fire with fire. Or in this case, throw another Shutendoji at the Shutendoji. What the heavens do is send Odin, the sister of the first goddess mother that gave birth to the demigod children, and she has a child with Genta, a human warrior. Whether Odin knew that she was going to be defeated by the Shutendoji is not made clear, but what matters is that she had a baby. You, the player. And the Shutendoji, or should I say Kitsuto, didn't want to kill off his cousin immediately either. Although the new Shutendoji would become a formidable enemy, they would be the key to regaining his true form. He needed you to get strong enough to break his seal, but not strong enough to overthrow him completely. After generations of traveling Japan and cutting down demons, your family reaches the depths of hell to find your mother, Odin. Kitsuto appears and reveals that he had been making her birth demons all this time. All those monsters you killed up until now turn out to be your half-siblings. When Kitsuto takes over her body in the final battle, it's done in this really grotesque way. He climbs into her between her legs and turns both of them into a freaky creature with a bloated abdomen. But with the strength your bloodline built over the years, and all these special techniques passed down from one child to the next, your team defeats Kitsuto. Finally, the ending cutscene plays. Odin appears in her goddess form with a baby in her arms. Yes, it's him, she says. Your mother is going to take him to the heavens to bring the child to his mother, Ogyo. Odin has forgiven everything that happened, because look how cute he is. As she flies up, she tells you, there's no need to be sad. I know my children can stand on their own 2 feet now. That's all one needs to understand to accept death.
お前たちならどんな悲しみも必ず越えてゆく。大丈夫。お前たちの子供たちもその子供たちも大丈夫よ。元気でね。
Now, during OreShika's initial release, some players found this ending unsatisfying. To spend all this time to put an end to your family's curse, and then watch the culprit of your misery forgiven because he's a cute baby now, is anticlimactic. And if you reflect on the story, isn't Hiruko, the head goddess of the heavens who came up with the whole Shutendoji plan, responsible for putting you through hell? In the PSP remake of OreShika, once you defeat Kitsuto, the game gives you the option to enter the bonus stage and put a smackdown on Hiruko to show her that you are not just her pawn. Frankly, this battle isn't that gratifying either. When you defeat Hiruko, she's just like, are you satisfied? Will you forgive me now? You don't even get a new cutscene or anything. That just goes to show that the original ending does nicely conclude the story of OreShika. The preciousness of life is a major theme of this story, and babies come up again and again. If you think of Kitsuto as a child who was robbed of love and affection, to see him turn into a baby to finally reunite with his mother is touching and gives closure to this tragedy. The best moments of this last section come after the penultimate boss when Odin is momentarily released from her chains and properly unites with her descendants. She says she wants to take a good look at your team's faces and then realizes, oh, my child is long gone. How foolish of me. But that's why you all are here, in their place. She laments how she missed the development of her child, the first character with your name, and mourns what your bloodline has gone through, but is also moved to see that her descendants have grown so strong and brave. After scrolling through a final record of your family and the staff credits, Itsuka says her catchphrase to the player, let's believe in another day.
明日をバーンと
When I skimmed through the Famitsu guidebook for this game, this short snippet about the catchphrase caught my eye. I'm not sure if it was written by the game director Masuda or someone else, but it's touching. The depletion of the ozone layer and the rising carbon dioxide concentrations, ethnic conflicts around the world, the worst unemployment rates this country has seen, the lowering birth rate, and the spread of AIDS. Honestly, I'm afraid to read the newspaper lately. I'll die in 30 years, but I'm worried for my children. There's only so much I can do as an individual about these structural problems. But I've decided to hold a baseless conviction to believe in the future, because thinking about what I can't do will only get me down. Itsuka's "Let's Believe in Another Day" is a declaration of that conviction. By the way, Itsuka and Kitsuto's names are made out of wordplay too. Together they read, "Surely, someday." OreShika is a game that earns all the sensational praise found on the back of its case. It tackles the universal theme of life, death, and lineage, but devotes every aspect of game design to make them personally resonant by making the player feel the weight of every character's life. And you can see its impressive effects on people through the decades-old fandom. If you look up the OreShika tag on the art site Pixiv, you'll find a lot of fan art, but you'll also see that people love their in-game children. They make comics and illustrations about the drama their family experienced or what they believed happened between characters. It's easy to get attached to your virtual family because, despite how static their portraits are, they're so easy to project personalities onto. There's a Dungeons & Dragons-like appeal to this game. You can still go on the official PS1 release website with all its HTML glory to find its original fan art board. It's so sweet to find fan works like this from the year 2000. OreShika may not be as widely known as any Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest title, but there's a reason why those who played it often say that it was an unforgettable experience. So it's all the more puzzling how the long-awaited sequel disappointed a huge portion of its dedicated fans. I will preface this section by saying that Ore no Shikabane o Koete Yuke 2, or its localized title, OreShika Tainted Bloodlines, is not a bad game. With similar core game mechanics as the first title and the addition of new classes, it has the potential to be just as fun as the original, especially to players new to the franchise. Two major changes are that the player character is no longer the sole survivor of their clan, and that OreShika 2's exploration and growth is based on exploring a wider map in search of similarly cursed family members who are scattered across Japan. Players are placed in a random region at the start of a new playthrough, and by discovering new regions, you unlock shops and distant relatives that you can commence unions with. I suppose making babies with your cousins is better than with the spirit of your great-grandmother. Similarly, you can connect with other players by visiting their regions and making children with their characters, as well as recruiting them for expeditions or adopting them into your clan altogether. Many of the deities that were cursed into minor monster forms in the first title now have their own boss events. Overall, the premise of the first game was expanded in a fresh way, and most of the reviews I read about the localization by gamers new to the series give it fairly positive scores. Since this is the only localized title in the series, it's also the most easily accessible game in English, and I recommend people play it. For new players, the following complaints for OreShika 2 come from a place of nostalgia that can probably be ignored. But for returning players, I and many others had expectations that we would relive the centuries-spanning mission of the original title and embark on another personally effective experience. And I had these expectations because it was advertised to me like that, at least in Japan. With promotional material that emphasized the journey of your clan with callbacks to the original game from 15 years ago, the game was clearly marketed to longtime OreShika fans. It was only natural for them to get hyped. That said, my excitement for the game dissipated the moment I saw the trailer. because visually, almost nothing that spoke to me about the original game was present in the sequel. The designs for new characters do not reprise the dark, edgy art style of the original, but rather employ the soft, thin lines common in modern anime. The dull, earthy color palette was substantially brightened, and that is accurate to the colors seen in the Tale of Genji scrolls. But OreShika 1's style, with its muddier, messier strokes, had a sense of griminess that better reflected the dire tone of the story and the reality of unrefined Heian period life. I'll give credit where credit is due though. The No and Kabuki theater layouts in some of the combat screens are very cool. But the combat did away with the flat, static, top-down view in exchange for three-dimensional stages, losing that painted feel I loved in the first title. And the biggest drawback for me is that these kids are not cute. I don't give a crap of how you can take a picture of yourself with the Vita camera and make a character based on your looks. I don't care if 3D models are more customizable and posable. In theory, this change to 3D allows for more variation, but these randomly generated characters do not speak to me like the static portraits of OreShika 1. Like, look, in all the OreShika games, you use the photography studio to take family portraits of your current household, which is a cute way to keep records of who was alive, when, and with who. In PS1 OreShika, it looked like this. They just slapped on square portraits into a frame and it felt kind of pragmatic, purely for the sake of record keeping. PSP OreShika looks like a more formal family photo. With the artwork updated to include the torso, now the characters look like they share the same space. This is great, still limited in expression, but it feels more organic. Finally, we have the Vita photos, and the first thing you notice is that someone sticks out like a sore thumb. Okay, we have to talk about Nueko. So, what is OreShika 2 about? This game is set 100 years after the original game, and the family you manage here is not directly connected to the first game. In the middle of the Heian period, 5 ritual items are stolen from the imperial palace, and a combination of natural calamity as well as demonic armies send Japan into chaos. The Emperor of Japan consults the sorcerer Abe no Seimei for a solution, and offers the warrior family guarding the palace as human sacrifice. And thus, your family is massacred. Then Kitsuto from the first game, now a god, appears to ask if your family wants revenge for your unjust fate. You are born again through the sacrifice of a woman named Nueko, but with the same 2 curses as the first game: shortened life and the inability to create life with another mortal. With the support of the Imperial Palace's princess, who is trying to remove the sorcerer Seimei's influence over the emperor, your family slowly grows and collects the power needed to get your revenge. But it turns out that Abe no Seimei is an immortal who needs to be killed to lift your family's curse. He challenges you to kill him and also to bring the woman Nueko to him. After this encounter with Seimei, the head goddess Hiruko, hey, do you remember her? Comes down from the heavens to remove the seal on Nueko, allowing the family to conduct a resurrection ritual on Nueko to have her join your household. From this midpoint of the game, Nueko becomes a key character, because every time you defeat Seimei with her on your expedition team, the spirits Seimei controls return to Nueko. Through these battles, Nueko piece by piece regains memories of her past, revealing Seimei's true motives and her connection to him. In the latter portion of the game, you find out that Seimei is Nueko's son. In her past, Nueko fell in love with a god who wanted to spend eternity with her, and that god tried to achieve this by creating an immortal child with Nueko, and then tried to take over that child's body. Nueko, however, was not keen on the idea of sacrificing her child like that, and instead sealed her god husband in the realm of the dead. In the final battle, Seimei's demon father takes over his body, because he was following him around this whole time. When you defeat Demon Seimei, Nueko tells the head goddess Hiruko to take Seimei's spirit into the heavens to make him a god, and she and her ex-lover return to the realm of the dead to sleep together. I know I truncated the plot a bit, but can you see what happened here? What does this story have to do with you, the player? I emphasized time and time again that in the original OreShika, the player and their family were the main characters of the game. It's your quest for salvation that pushed things along. And this is subtle, but the way OreShika 1 tells its backstory is really important too. In that game, there's essentially two timelines. First is the journey that the player's family experiences through gameplay, and second is the backstory that is gradually fed to you through Kitsuto and the other boss characters' dialogue. Kitsuto isn't just an interesting villain, he's a great narrative device. His dialogue starts off as simple character introductions and lore dumps, which give your family's journey enough breathing room to be its own thing. Eventually, as you piece together Kitsuto's stories and hints from the other deities, you realize that Kitsuto and you are cousins and the lead actors in this grand tragedy between heaven and earth. You see these two timelines converge at your own pace as you play the game. Compared to that graceful structure, Nueko's direct participation on your team in OreShika 2 is a hindrance both narratively and mechanically. Once she joins your household, she becomes the focus of the story and is completely necessary to game progression. And the further into her story you go, not only is your family pushed into the background, but the more you realize that your family was caught up in the crossfires of her family's bullshit. Sure, in OreShika 1, you served as a pawn in the Heaven's plans, but at least you were a super duper special pawn. But in OreShika 2, any family unlucky enough to get sacrificed by Seimei could have taken your place. You put generations and generations of your family through a misery, and there isn't even a goddess mommy to hold you at the end of the story. And mechanically, your family takes on the brunt of the work. A lot of fans complain that not only does Nueko's inclusion in the team take away freedom and party formation, but you have to spend your hard-earned deity points when she isn't even that strong. Oftentimes, she's disadvantageous in combat, yet she takes most of the spotlight in a game that is supposed to be about the player. OreShika 1 impressed me with how its gameplay and story work together to become so much more than the sum of their parts. And to go from that to an experience that deprioritizes your family both in the game's system and plot in favor for some woman who turns out to be the source of all your problems, it's a baffling change. It didn't have to be this way either, because Nueko as a character isn't that unlikable. She has a lot going on for her. She's played by the seasoned, talented voice actress Megumi Hayashibara, known for playing Rei from Evangelion and female Rama from Rama 1/2. I like her Doll's Kill-esque outfit, and in a different story, her background as a human-turned-goddess-turned-demi-human could have been interesting. But considering how her backstory pushes you, the player of this game, and your family's story to the sidelines, it's hard not to be annoyed by her. Honestly, other than the game's staff, I'm not sure who likes this Nueko character. OreShika 2 is not Nueko's first appearance in the OreShika universe. She's actually a character from Onigiri Nueko, a series of light novels written by the game director. However, even the people who were fans of the novels were upset by how different her character is in the game. Some people outright hated Nueko in the game, while others were purely irritated about how she affected the gameplay. Still, it's one thing to have a bunch of people voice their displeasure on Twitter, but it's another thing to have multiple wiki articles detailing everything wrong with her. A large portion of OreShika 2's article on Pixiv Encyclopedia and Nico Nicopedia is about Nueko and all the problems she caused. And I found a whole wiki site called OreShika 2 Funeral Hall that compiled pages explaining how Nueko ruined the game. This site also has a catalog of Twitter posts and interview snippets from the game director, Shoji Masuda, and scenario writer Miwa Shoda that responded to the online outrage. I'm not going to talk about that though, because Masuda's Twitter handle reads, Shoji Masuda, unauthorized reproductions on aggregator sites prohibited. He's sick of people picking at his words, and I'm not one to kick someone who's already down. I know this happened back in 2014 when pedantically hating on characters was an acceptable fandom pastime, but I can't remember the last time I saw people drag a video game character this much. You know it's bad when Japanese fans call a character a Mary Sue. Some of the points in these articles are nitpicky, but they show how Nuiko frustrates players on multiple fronts. For example, that family photo. Not only does Nuiko's distinct look clash with the family's bland faces and robes, but her attitude towards her family is always standoffish. Even though you need to use deity points to resurrect her, she can't make offspring, so she effectively delays the generational strengthening of your family. But in the final scene of the game, without shedding a tear to her biological son, she turns to your clan and says that she thinks of you as family. Huh? This feels out of left field, because there's so little in the game that makes Nuiko feel like family. Then there are small things in the game that put her on a pedestal. It can't be helped that the other deities talk about Nuiko so much when she's the main character, but it's annoying when the male gods who are supposed to be performing unions with your family keep bringing up how special this other woman is. Then there are the parting words. Just like the original OreShika 1, when a family member passes, they get a touching final saying. In the PS1 version, there's like 80 different phrases for both male and female characters recorded. So, roughly 200 possible parting words in a game that probably takes 50 to 100 characters to complete. That sounds reasonable. Nuiko also goes through the cycle of death and resurrection as well, so it's only fair that she also gets parting words with every time she dies, and there should be some variety among them, right? Nuiko has 100 recorded parting words to herself. Then there's a scene during the game at which point Nuiko's relation to Seimei is revealed, and you realize that she's responsible for the events that led to your family's massacre. Your home helper Kochin asks if you have any resentment towards Nuiko over this. And if you answer yes, she calls you Chisa, as in petty-minded and unsympathetic. I'm sorry, I'm unsympathetic for feeling disdain towards the woman that cursed my whole family? Okay, Kochin was my last straw. This doesn't have to do with Nuiko, but it exemplifies the dissonance between the family's fan-focused marketing and the intentions of its creators. As a character, Kochin is fine, but her name pisses me off. Initially, the game studio called out to fans to submit name suggestions for her, and her name was planned to be chosen from these fan submissions. This would have been a cute way for fans to feel connected with the new game. However, the game director Masuda himself came up with the name Kochin, and after convincing himself that this was the best, most memorable name, disregarded the fan-submitted names and went with Kochin.
名前も一般公募しているっていうのも全部見てて、結局皆さんからのご意見を踏襲しない形でコーチンって何なのよって思ったんですけど。
Okay, fine. Like, sure, you can be like that. Whatever, man. It's your game. It's your baby. Do whatever you want. In all seriousness, I think what happened to OreShika 2 is funny. Basically, there was fan backlash because this long-awaited sequel had a story that felt like fanfiction. I don't have any real resentment towards Masuda and can forgive him for his hubris. The way he wrote Nuiko is reminiscent of a 13-year-old on DeviantArt who loves his original Sonic a little too much. And it's kind of adorable. By the way, this is my channel mascot and failed VTuber, Yakino.
Hello.
And it's a shame that Shoji Masuda's reputation was damaged by one mediocre plot when he has an impressive track record as a game director. He directed Tengai Makyo 2, one of the most expensive and ambitious titles for the PC Engine. It was a project full of colorful animated cutscenes and vibrant voice acting that told a story about becoming your own person. Goddamn Joe Hisaishi of Studio Ghibli fame composed music for this game. Linda Cube, with its I Can't Believe It's Not Akira art, is a strange animal collecting RPG with a dark and disturbing sci-fi story that came out before Pokemon. You can feel his ambition and creativity even in titles like Next King, an odd dating sim/dice roll RPG. The man has the bravery to name princesses based on spice. Long hail Princess Dill. Not all his games are commercial hits, but he has a strong record of making creative games that anyone should be proud of. And if I were to guess what happened with OreShika 2, I think that reputation inflated his ego a little bit. I also think that because he was doing non-game projects around the same time as OreShika 2, like writing those Onikiri Nueko novels and supervising the light novel and anime adaptations of Log Horizon and Maoyu Maoyusha, his passion for video games could have waned a bit. He even on record has said that he likes making games from the ground up, starting from the mechanical game design, and needed a lot of convincing to make a sequel to OreShika, a title with a pre-established game format. With that personal context in mind, maybe OreShika 1 fans should have been happy that we got a sequel at all. And again, if a player doesn't have that nostalgia going into OreShika 2, it's a fun RPG. Ultimately, this dissatisfaction for the sequel is a result of marketing that focused too much on the nostalgia of the original game. Oh, and I forgot to mention this, but Nueko was barely present in the promotional material for OreShika 2. I think if fans were primed to her inclusion in the game, even just a little bit more, she would have been so much easier to accept. The only thing I'm truly disappointed in is how OreShika 2 was localized to English, while OreShika 1 was not. As I'm writing this in August of 2024, the PSP version of OreShika 1 was ported to the PS4 and PS5 as part of the PS Plus library just last April, but it's region locked. You can only get it from the Japanese store. If Sony doesn't release this game in English in the next few months, I doubt they ever will, and that makes me sad. But I totally understand that during its initial release back in 1999, it was probably deemed too Japanese and too dark to be marketable for the West. I mean, look, Pokemon is an innocent game for kids, and somehow that franchise caused a small satanic panic. On top of its literal exploration of hell, OreShika's sexual undertones cannot be ignored, and its artwork is undeniably anime-inspired. I may have to accept that the time to localize this game has already come and passed. Similarly, it's hard to imagine Masuda's other games like Tengai Makyo 2 and Lindacube getting localized either. The PC engine, called the TurboGrafx 16 in North America, didn't take off in the 80s when the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo were dominating the Western market. It's not just about the console's popularity though. Many of Masuda's games are text-heavy and have cinematic elements that would have been expensive to translate and dub over. Both Tengai Makyo 2 and Lindacube have PS1 remakes that are easier to localize. And indeed, the PS1 remake Lindacube Again did get a fan-made English patch just this year. Still, it feels bittersweet that the original versions of these games are sort of lost to time and difficult to experience across cultures and platforms. For example, I really want to play Tengai Makyo with its original PC Engine graphics, but since I'm a dum-dum who can't figure out how to run it on Windows, I might have to opt for the PS1 release that replaced its pixel art with hand-animated sprites and cutscenes. But with your support on Patreon, I can buy myself a PC Engine Mini. Going back to the topic of localization, as a Japanese to English translator myself, I wish fan translations weren't as important as they are to the archival of old video games. Translating video games is hard because there are so many moving parts and text restrictions to consider, and whoever has to deal with that should get paid. But the moment money gets involved in fan translations, copyright issues kick in. It's frustrating to know that in order to get legal and ethical archiving done, we have to rely on game publishers, but they're often not the most reliable. I made this video mostly for fun, and it's nowhere as good as actually translating the game, but this video is sort of my attempt to archive OreShika 1 in English. However, seeing how text-based and narrative-driven Japanese games are treated now, I think the game localization scene has changed for the better. Final Fantasy VII, one of the most highly regarded RPGs of all time, was originally localized into English with a pretty shoddy translation. But now, Final Fantasy titles get amazing high-quality worldwide releases simultaneously in Japanese and English. Sometimes it takes a while for localizations to come out, like the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, but publishers clearly recognize that there is an English-speaking market for these titles. We don't have to worry about games being too weird to get localized now either. I'm not a fan of Conception, but it makes me happy to see that this odd dating sim disguised as an RPG was dubbed. Not all games have to be masterpieces to be worth playing, especially for gamers who want to experience the history of a developer or a specific game director. With that said, game localization is still complicated and frankly burdensome. A good localization project should include a streamlined use of translation softwares, story bibles, glossaries, style guides, access to the original creative team, and, most importantly, care from the localization team and original publishers. In Aidan Maher's Washington Post article, How the Greatest Japanese RPGs of the 90s Came to the West, American localizer Alexander O. Smith accounts the strange hurdles he had to go through to localize Square Enix titles like 1999's FF8. Quoting the article, he described the horror of having to use GameShark devices and VHS recordings to revisit important narrative moments, and translating Japanese text directly from the CRT monitor into a flat text file. Back then, game developers barely had the tools to accommodate localization, not to mention a lack of standardized workflow. Later in the same article, Aidan and Alexander discussed the localization of Vagrant Story. When Vagrant Story came out, I made sure that Square leadership knew people appreciated the localization, Smith said. Even several years after Final Fantasy VII's success and the subsequent upgrade in quality of localizations, coming from companies like Square and their contemporaries Working Design and Atlus, a lot of Japanese companies still had no idea whether their English localizations were good or bad. So he buttered up his superiors by sending them articles and online feedback detailing the overwhelmingly positive response to Vagrant Story. It's almost baffling that even when they entered the global market, video game publishers in the past weren't aware of the quality of their localizations. The care and time that they put into translations in the present show how far this industry has come and how culturally we recognize video games as an art form. I like to think that we are well past these dark ages of localization, but especially when game developers don't have in-house localization teams and must outsource this process, there are so many pitfalls that localization projects can fall into. Short, exhausting deadlines, communication issues and corporate cultural differences with the original publishers, projects being passed between different teams without proper follow-up, inconsistencies between different titles in a franchise, and terrible AI translations that take more time to correct than a human translating from scratch. All these things can negatively affect the quality of a translation. Throw in the complications that come with porting old software for newer consoles, and I can see why companies are reluctant to localize older games. In my mind, Shoji Masuda's best works didn't make it to North America, and I'm a little bitter about that. But at least one of his titles did. OreShika 2's localization most likely happened in parallel to the Japanese development of the game, which was probably easier than going back to OreShika 1. All I can really do is express my love for the original OreShika to the best of my ability, and accept that this passed through the cracks of video game publishing. And maybe it's a matter of patience. Sometimes games get localized and ported totally out of the blue, so it might be worth holding onto my hopes for just a little longer. By the way, Sony, when are you going to release Ape Escape 3 for the PS5?